February 19, 1945. Dawn breaks over Iwo Jima. A gray haze hangs low, clinging to black volcanic ash that crunches under booted feet. The air is thick with salt, smoke, and the acrid scent of cordite from naval bombardments that pounded the island through the night. In the distance, the jagged silhouette of Mount Suribachi rises like a dark sentinel over a scarred landscape. A squad of U.S. Marines crawls across the beach, their rifles clutched tightly, eyes scanning the horizon. Ahead, the Japanese defenses rise like steel and concrete monsters, bunkers dug deep into the rock, their small openings staring like dark eyes. Mortars shake the ground intermittently, and the whistle of incoming shells is punctuated by distant explosions. Among the Marines, flamethrower teams advance cautiously. The bulky equipment seems almost alive, a mechanical beast fueled by fire. The men know what awaits inside the enemy bunkers: hidden soldiers, tunnels, and the threat of sudden death. And yet, the flamethrowers promise a new form of terror, one that even the seasoned Japanese defenders have rarely faced. This fire is about to change the battlefield. By late 1944, the Pacific War had entered a new, brutal phase. The United States had moved steadily across the Central Pacific, capturing islands one by one: Gilbert, Marshall, Mariana, each step bringing them closer to Japan's home islands. Airfields were the prize. Control of land meant control of the skies. Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island 750 miles south of Tokyo, suddenly emerged as a strategic linchpin. Its two airstrips could shelter Japanese fighters, threatening B-29 bombers en route to the Japanese mainland. Denying the island to Japan was imperative, and yet capturing it would prove catastrophic. The Japanese had anticipated this. For years, engineers and soldiers had transformed the black volcanic soil into a labyrinth of bunkers, tunnels, and pillboxes. Every ridge, every rock face was a potential killing ground. On Suribachi, concrete fortifications blended seamlessly with the terrain. Observation posts, sniper nests, and artillery emplacements created overlapping fields of fire. The defenders were disciplined, battle-hardened, and trained to exploit the island's natural defenses. Each bunker was more than a shelter; it was a trap, designed to hold off attackers at any cost. For the U.S. Marines, the intelligence briefings were stark. Roughly 21,000 Japanese troops commanded the island, far outnumbering the few thousand Marines landing each day in earlier Pacific operations. Their strategy would not be conventional defense. Commander Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the island's Japanese general, had studied the American approach in previous battles. He rejected massed frontal assaults, opting instead for attrition, digging deep into rock and soil, forcing the Americans into confined kill zones where every approach could be turned into a death trap. On the American side, the buildup was monumental. By February 1945, the 5th and 3rd Marine Divisions, supported by heavy naval bombardment and airstrikes, prepared to assault the island. Amphibious landing craft carried waves of soldiers, tanks, artillery, and engineers. Among these were specialized flamethrower teams, a small but crucial force. Flamethrowers had been tested in earlier Pacific battles, but Iwo Jima presented a new challenge: a network of underground fortifications impervious to conventional explosives. Commanders hoped fire might root out defenders hidden in these bunkers and caves. The weeks before the invasion were filled with precise, deadly planning. Reconnaissance planes mapped Japanese positions, naval guns leveled cliffs and beaches. Intelligence officers studied captured documents, prisoner testimonies, and aerial photographs. Every ridge, every bunker was cataloged, numbered, and targeted. Marines trained for days under simulated conditions, crawling through volcanic sand, coordinating flamethrower teams with rifle squads, learning the rhythm of the approaching storm. Despite the preparation, the psychological weight was enormous.
Marines had seen what fortified positions could do on other Pacific islands. Saipan, Peleliu, and Guam had shown them the deadly efficiency of Japanese defenders. Flamethrowers offered hope, but they were dangerous to operate. The fuel was volatile, the equipment heavy, and a single misstep could be fatal. Yet even amidst fear, there was resolve. Every man understood that the success of the landing depended on reaching those bunkers, neutralizing them, and forcing the defenders out. As the first waves approached Iwo Jima's shore, the air was filled with the roar of naval artillery and the constant drone of reconnaissance planes overhead. Volcanic ash churned under landing craft as Marines prepared to step onto a beach that had been described in countless reports as a fortress carved from fire and rock. Here, strategy, courage, and technology would collide in ways the world rarely saw. And in the tunnels beneath, Japanese soldiers waited, unaware of the new terror that would soon descend upon them. The stage was set. The island was a cauldron of fire, earth, and steel, awaiting the moment when flame would meet stone and human ingenuity would clash with human tenacity.
Beneath the jagged slopes of Iwo Jima, the Japanese had constructed something extraordinary, a fortress network that defied conventional attack. The island's black volcanic rock was hollowed into tunnels wide enough for men and equipment, connected to hidden bunkers and artillery positions. Mortars, machine guns, and snipers could fire from openings almost invisible against the dark rock. These fortifications were not isolated. They were designed to support one another, creating overlapping fields of fire that could decimate attackers at every step. Concrete shelters with steel reinforcements could withstand naval shells and aerial bombs, turning even the heaviest bombardment into a minor inconvenience. The Japanese soldiers themselves embodied a philosophy of absolute defense. Trained for endurance, they were prepared to fight in confined spaces for weeks, even months, with little food or water. Kuribayashi emphasized flexibility in ingenuity. Instead of massed banzai charges, he instructed his troops to hold positions as long as possible, emerge for counterattacks when advantageous, and use tunnels to reappear unexpectedly. Every defender carried a personal sense of duty, loyalty, and fearlessness, knowing that surrender was considered dishonorable. The bunkers were extensions of this mindset, claustrophobic, lethal, and psychologically designed to unnerve invaders. On the American side, understanding these defenses required both adaptation and innovation. Flamethrowers, previously used sparingly in the Pacific, became central to assault planning. The M2 and later M2A1 flamethrowers could project a stream of burning fuel up to 40 meters, igniting wooden and earthen structures. Engineers modified tactics for Iwo Jima's unique terrain. Flame teams would advance under covering fire, targeting bunker entrances, ventilation shafts, and cave openings. Their presence was more than a tool of destruction, it was psychological warfare. Soldiers had learned from Guadalcanal and Peleliu that the smell and sight of fire induced panic among defenders confined in enclosed spaces. Yet flamethrowers had limitations. The fuel tanks were cumbersome, making operators prime targets. Overheating could disable the equipment, and refueling under fire was perilous. Commanders had to balance aggression with caution, coordinating flamethrower teams with rifle squads, mortars, and explosives. In training, Marines learned to use fire in combination with grenades and demolition charges, creating layered assaults designed to flush out defenders without exposing the operators unnecessarily. This careful orchestration underscored a fundamental truth. In Iwo Jima, technology alone could not win the day. Human discipline, coordination, and nerves of steel were equally vital. By the time the first full-scale assault began, Iwo Jima had become a crucible of fire and steel. The island's black sand was littered with the remnants of naval bombardment, and every ridge and cliff concealed hidden defenders. The stage was now perfectly set.
Flamethrower teams would advance alongside infantry, confronting a network of fortifications designed to resist everything but fire itself. What would follow was a clash not only of armies, but of strategy, technology, and human endurance. The reactions of those inside the bunkers, shock, fear, and desperate resistance, would reveal a side of the Pacific War rarely captured in photographs or reports. The anticipation of this first encounter with flame set the tone for the entire battle, linking strategy, technology, and human emotion in a deadly ballet. Every Marine and every Japanese soldier on the island would soon confront a reality where conventional tactics met a new form of warfare.
For the men carrying flamethrowers, every step on Iwo Jima was a test of nerves and endurance. The equipment was heavy, up to 70 kilograms including fuel and protective gear, and unwieldy in the black volcanic sand that clung to every surface. Yet the weight was secondary to the fear. Operators had to advance under enemy fire, knowing that every bullet could ignite the fuel or end their lives. Despite this, the Marines moved with discipline. They had rehearsed the coordination of flame with infantry movement for weeks, learning how to approach a bunker, calculate the trajectory of the stream, and retreat to cover without exposing their comrades. The human cost of this technology was immediate. Flamethrower operators were prime targets for Japanese snipers. Yet, for every Marine who fell, others pressed forward. The mental toll was immense. Witnessing fire consume a bunker, hearing the screams from within, and continuing the assault required a compartmentalization that few could imagine outside the battlefield. Even so, the men knew the effectiveness of their weapon. The sight of defenders fleeing smoke-filled tunnels or surrendering after being trapped validated the fear and risk they carried. Courage in this environment was both a necessity and a burden. Iwo Jima was more than a beachhead. It was a fortress designed to funnel attackers into kill zones. Traditional infantry assaults had proven costly in earlier Pacific campaigns, and commanders recognized that flamethrowers could alter the tactical equation. By projecting fire directly into bunker openings and cave mouths, flame teams neutralized defensive positions that otherwise would require costly hand-to-hand assaults or prolonged artillery bombardments. The tactics were precise. Marines would coordinate suppression fire from rifles and mortars while flamethrowers approached the bunker. Smoke and fire were used to obscure operators and disorient defenders. Once a bunker was ignited, infantry could move in to secure the position, often without sustaining heavy casualties. The flamethrowers' reach, though limited, was enough to penetrate the ventilation shafts and firing slits that had protected Japanese soldiers for months. Each bunker cleared represented not just a tactical gain, but a psychological advantage that rippled through both sides. The flamethrower was a deceptively simple, yet profoundly effective weapon. The M2 and M2A1 models could project fuel up to 40 meters, burning at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Tanks of pressurized fuel allowed for bursts of several seconds, enough to saturate a bunker or cave opening. Operators carried protective canvas and reinforced helmets, but the danger was ever present. A single bullet striking the fuel tank could cause catastrophic explosions. Engineers had refined the weapon based on prior encounters in the Pacific. Modifications included longer nozzles for reaching into deep bunkers, improved ignition systems, and coordination with explosive charges to maximize destructive efficiency. In the unique terrain of Iwo Jima, where Japanese defenses were underground and heavily fortified, these innovations were not optional, they were decisive. The flamethrower was no longer just a tool, it became a force multiplier, allowing smaller teams to achieve what conventional firepower alone could not. For Japanese defenders, the arrival of flamethrowers was more than a physical threat, it was an existential terror. The enclosed bunkers that had been their sanctuary became instruments of panic. Smoke, fire, and the acrid smell of burning fuel penetrated every crack, every tunnel, and every ventilation shaft. Soldiers who had trained to endure artillery, bombs, and waves of infantry now faced an enemy that could literally reach into the heart of their stronghold. The psychological impact extended to the American side as well.
Flamethrower operators, knowing the devastation they caused, carried both pride and a haunting awareness of their own power. Accounts from Marines describe a mixture of exultation and unease as they watched fire consume fortifications and, occasionally, those inside. War at Iwo Jima was not only a contest of strategy or technology, it was a confrontation with fear itself on both sides of the battlefield.
For U.S. commanders, flamethrowers were both a tactical asset and a delicate responsibility. Leaders like Colonel Harry Lee and Major General Keller E. Rocky understood the stakes. Iwo Jima's fortifications could not be taken by brute force alone. Orders were meticulous, emphasizing coordination between flamethrower teams, infantry squads, and artillery. Every assault required precision. Missteps could result in catastrophic casualties or the loss of a critical position. Kuribayashi, on the Japanese side, demonstrated equal ingenuity. Recognizing the threat flamethrowers posed to his carefully dug tunnels, he encouraged countermeasures, reconfiguring bunker entrances, constructing secondary exits, and dispersing troops to reduce the risk of mass casualties. His leadership emphasized endurance and adaptation. Though he could not remove the fear induced by fire, he forced the Americans to fight for every inch of ground. The decisions of both sides reflected a stark truth. Leadership in Iwo Jima was as much about managing human psychology as it was about commanding firepower. When flamethrowers first appeared on the battlefield, Japanese defenders were often unprepared. The sight of concentrated fire streaming into what had seemed impenetrable bunkers caused immediate panic. Ventilation shafts, firing slits, and tunnel openings, all carefully designed to protect soldiers, were suddenly lethal channels for burning fuel. Accounts from Japanese officers describe frantic attempts to escape confined spaces, hastily abandoning fortified positions they had defended for months. The shock was compounded by the weapon's unpredictability. Flamethrowers could ignite structural timber, collapse earthworks, and force defenders to confront fire in enclosed, oxygen-limited spaces. Even the most disciplined soldiers had to adapt rapidly or face destruction. Many perished trying to retreat through tunnels filled with smoke. Others surrendered, a rarity in Japanese doctrine. The arrival of flamethrowers altered the battle's dynamic. It was no longer just a test of firepower, but a confrontation with a terrifying new form of combat. The use of flamethrowers raised questions about the morality of warfare. To the operators, the weapon was a necessity, a tool designed to reduce casualties among their own comrades by eliminating entrenched defenders more efficiently. Yet the visceral horror it inflicted was undeniable. Flames consumed not only fortifications, but in many cases, human life. American reports often describe a tension between professional duty and the horror of witnessing its consequences. The Japanese soldiers, trapped in confined spaces, experienced suffering unparalleled by conventional firepower. Historians and military analysts have since debated the ethical implications. Flamethrowers were devastatingly effective, but their use highlighted the brutal reality of close-quarters warfare. Victory often came at the cost of profound human suffering. Flamethrowers did not act alone. They were part of a carefully orchestrated system of combat. Naval bombardments softened key positions before landing craft reached the beach. Artillery and mortars provided covering fire as flamethrower teams advanced. Infantry squads cleared the debris, secured perimeters, and assisted operators in repositioning. This integration amplified the psychological and physical impact of the weapon. The combination of fire, bullets, and explosives created a relentless environment for Japanese defenders. Their senses were overwhelmed. Noise, heat, and smoke collided with the shock of concentrated firepower. The battlefield became a sensory crucible where coordination and discipline dictated survival. Flamethrowers, within this context, were decisive not solely because of their destructive capacity, but because they multiplied the effectiveness of every other tool in the Marine arsenal.
February 19, 1945.
The first waves of Marines hit the beaches of Iwo Jima at 08:59, amid a sky thick with smoke and ash. Naval guns had pounded the island overnight, but the Japanese bunkers, hidden in volcanic ridges and reinforced with steel and concrete, remained intact. Mortar fire rained down on the beach, and machine gun nests swept the sand with deadly precision. For the first assault teams, progress was measured in yards. Every bunker taken was a small miracle. Flamethrower teams moved cautiously, crouched low, fuel tanks strapped to their backs. The M2A1 model hissed with pressure as operators advanced toward the first target, a reinforced bunker near the northern ridge of Suribachi. The opening was small, almost unnoticeable from a distance. Inside, Japanese soldiers braced for conventional assault, unaware that the Marines carried a weapon capable of transforming the confined space into a furnace. With a deep breath, the flamethrower operator aimed, ignited the fuel, and released a stream of fire that penetrated the bunker's aperture. Within seconds, smoke and flames erupted from the entrance, forcing the defenders into a chaotic retreat through tunnels they had relied upon for months. Marines covering the approach moved in, clearing debris and securing the position. Casualties were heavy on both sides, but the flamethrower had achieved what rifle fire alone could not: rapid neutralization of a fortified stronghold. As the day progressed, these small victories accumulated. Flamethrowers, once peripheral tools in the Pacific campaigns, became central to every tactical maneuver. Teams coordinated with infantry, mortars, and grenades to systematically target bunkers along the ridge. Each assault followed a rehearsed pattern: suppress, ignite, advance, secure. Yet no pattern could fully mitigate the danger. Operators were exposed to enemy fire, and the risk of equipment malfunction or accidental ignition was ever present. Despite this, the effectiveness of fire reshaped the battlefield. Meanwhile, Japanese soldiers responded with desperation. Some attempted counterattacks, lobbing grenades and using handheld explosives to collapse approaches. Others tried to reinforce secondary tunnels, hoping to trap flamethrower teams. Yet the relentless advance of the Marines, combined with the shock of seeing entire bunkers consumed by flame, steadily eroded Japanese resistance. Kuribayashi's strategy of attrition was beginning to strain under the new reality. Fire could reach places artillery could not, and the psychological impact was profound. By midday, the northern sectors of Suribachi were scarred with blackened craters and smoldering bunkers. Reports from the front described the uncanny sight of flames shooting from fortified apertures, smoke filling the sky, and defenders emerging from tunnels in surrender or panic. Flamethrowers, small in number, multiplied the effectiveness of the infantry many times over. Commanders noted that positions previously thought impervious were now vulnerable, and morale among U.S. forces rose with each successful breach. The intensity of combat escalated further in the afternoon. Teams coordinated simultaneous strikes on multiple bunkers, creating overlapping zones of fire. Japanese defenders were forced to split their focus, retreating from key positions and exposing flanks. For the Marines, the psychological reinforcement of seeing fire succeed where bullets had faltered was significant. Flamethrowers were no longer just tools, they were an instrument that dictated the tempo of battle. Casualty reports from the day illustrate the deadly efficiency of these tactics. While exact numbers vary, records indicate that flamethrower-assisted assaults significantly reduced the time required to neutralize heavily fortified positions, saving lives among attacking units. Japanese soldiers trapped in confined spaces often suffered devastating losses, while others abandoned positions entirely, revealing a critical turning point in the U.S. approach. By the evening, the northern ridges were largely under Marine control. The combined effect of artillery, infantry, and flamethrowers had shattered the first line of defense, yet Suribachi remained a formidable obstacle. The mountain's south side, still bristling with hidden bunkers and tunnel networks, awaited the next day's assault. Flamethrowers had proven their value, but the battle was far from over. Every Marine knew that tomorrow would demand the same courage and coordination, and that the Japanese defenders, though shocked, would not surrender easily. The first day of Iwo Jima had demonstrated a fundamental truth:
Flamethrowers were more than weapons of fire. They were instruments that could break the psychological and physical defenses of an enemy long considered unassailable. And as the smoke settled over the black sand, both sides understood that the fight had entered a new, more harrowing phase, where survival depended on speed, coordination, and sheer willpower.
February 20th, 1945. The second day of battle brought intensified assaults across Iwo Jima's southern ridges and the lower slopes of Suribachi. Flamethrower teams, now battle-hardened from the first day, advanced with renewed precision. They were no longer isolated operators. Their movements were integrated into a symphony of infantry, artillery, and naval support. Every strike was coordinated, every flame measured to maximize impact while minimizing exposure. The Japanese defenders, though shocked by the first day's fire, adapted quickly. Secondary tunnels and hidden entrances allowed soldiers to escape some initial bursts of flame, and sniper teams targeted advancing operators with deadly accuracy. Yet flamethrowers, combined with suppressive fire, had fundamentally altered the dynamics of defense. Bunkers that had withstood months of bombardment now succumbed to the relentless heat. Within confined tunnels, smoke and fire cut off oxygen, forcing defenders to flee or surrender, a scenario that had been nearly impossible in prior campaigns. One notable assault occurred on the western slope of Suribachi, where a cluster of interlinked bunkers commanded a narrow approach to the summit. Flamethrower teams advanced alongside rifle squads, engineers placing demolition charges to collapse secondary exits. At 10:32 a.m., the first bunker ignited, flame shooting through ventilation shafts and collapsing the earthen roof. Japanese soldiers, trapped and disoriented, attempted to flee through adjacent tunnels, only to encounter waiting Marines. Within 30 minutes, the position was secured and dozens of defenders were killed or captured. The rapid neutralization of such a fortified cluster underscored the decisive role of flame in close-quarters combat. Throughout the island, flamethrowers became focal points of engagement. In the northern sectors, teams coordinated simultaneous strikes on multiple bunkers, creating zones of overlapping fire that forced defenders to abandon positions or perish in enclosed spaces. Each successful attack provided immediate tactical advantage. Hills, ridges, and caves could be claimed without prolonged hand-to-hand fighting. The presence of flamethrowers also freed infantry to maneuver more aggressively, knowing that entrenched positions could be neutralized without excessive risk. The psychological toll on Japanese soldiers was profound. Many were caught off guard by the weapon's effectiveness in confined spaces, a scenario they had not anticipated. Accounts from officers describe panic, disorientation, and in some cases, mass surrender, an extraordinary event given the prevailing code of honor. Even well-trained units, accustomed to enduring heavy bombardment and relentless infantry assaults, struggled to maintain cohesion when fire consumed their carefully prepared defenses. The flamethrower had introduced an element of unpredictability that undermined months of meticulous preparation. On the American side, commanders observed these effects with a mixture of strategic satisfaction and grim awareness. Flamethrowers had proved decisive, but operators remained highly vulnerable. Losses were sustained, and every team required coordination, cover fire, and rapid repositioning. Lessons learned on February 20th would inform every subsequent assault. The weapon's effectiveness depended not just on firepower, but on timing, integration, and the discipline of both operators and supporting infantry. By February 21st, the momentum had shifted. Key ridges and tunnel networks were secured, forcing Japanese forces into deeper, less accessible parts of the island. Flamethrowers were central to these successes. Reports noted that positions once considered impregnable were now being systematically neutralized. The combination of fire, smoke, and psychological shock had fractured the defenders' will, setting the stage for eventual capture of Suribachi and surrounding strategic points. The culmination of these efforts occurred on the southern slopes, where interconnected bunkers had resisted weeks of bombardment. Flamethrower teams, coordinated with grenades and demolitions, advanced under covering fire from infantry and artillery. By late afternoon, multiple strongholds were ablaze.
defenders either killed or forced into surrender. The mountain's summit, though still contested, now lay within reach. For the Marines, each bunker taken represented not only a tactical victory, but proof that strategy, technology, and courage could overcome even the most formidable fortifications. In the span of 3 days, flamethrowers had transformed the battlefield. They were not merely weapons, they were psychological catalysts, tactical multipliers, and instruments of survival. Japanese fortifications, designed to resist everything but fire, now faced a force capable of reaching into every hidden corner. By February 21st, the Marines had established a pattern, methodical, relentless, and devastatingly effective. The turning point had been reached. The first decisive breaches of Iwo Jima's bunkers had occurred, signaling the collapse of the Japanese defensive plan. Yet, the islands still resisted, and the battle's cost would remain staggering. The flamethrowers had won key positions, but the struggle for Iwo Jima would continue, testing every Marine, every tactic, and every ounce of endurance.
By late February 1945, the northern ridges of Iwo Jima had fallen to the U.S. Marines. The first decisive assaults, driven by flamethrower teams in coordination with infantry and artillery, had shattered the Japanese defensive line on Suribachi. The island's black volcanic sand was littered with the remnants of bunker walls, scorched earth, and the scattered gear of soldiers who had once occupied seemingly impregnable positions. The terrain bore silent testimony to the fire that had carved paths through concrete and steel. Casualties were heavy on both sides. Marine reports from the first 3 days indicate that flamethrower-assisted assaults significantly reduced the duration of bunker engagements, but each operation carried risk. Operators were exposed to sniper fire, collapsing structures, and the volatile fuel that powered their weapons. Despite these dangers, their effectiveness was undeniable. Japanese defenders, once confident in their fortifications, had been forced into hasty retreats, tunnel collapses, and in some cases surrender, a rarity in a culture that emphasized honor above life. Japanese losses were staggering. Estimates suggest that thousands of defenders were killed in the first week, with flamethrowers accounting for a significant proportion of bunker neutralizations. The confined spaces of tunnels and bunkers amplified the lethality of fire, making conventional defenses almost irrelevant. For the survivors, the psychological impact was profound. Fear, exhaustion, and the constant threat of immolation weighed heavily, undermining morale and disrupting command structures. Even Kuribayashi, brilliant strategist and architect of the island's defenses, faced the harsh reality that his attrition plan was being dismantled by a weapon designed not to break walls, but wills. The U.S. forces, meanwhile, recorded the tactical lessons of these early engagements meticulously. Flamethrowers proved that fire could penetrate defenses that artillery and bombs could not, altering the approach to fortified positions. Operational reports highlight the importance of integrating flame with infantry, mortars, and demolitions. Commanders recognized that the weapon's psychological impact was as significant as its physical destruction. Japanese soldiers confronted with fire inside bunkers often abandoned positions without direct confrontation, shortening engagements and reducing Marine casualties in the process. Eyewitness accounts for Marines convey the intensity of these encounters. Many described a mixture of fear, awe, and grim satisfaction. The battlefield was chaotic. Smoke, ash, and flames obscured vision, while the shriek of incoming shells punctuated the air. Yet amidst the terror, Marines relied on training, coordination, and courage to advance. Their ability to operate flamethrowers under these conditions became a defining feature of the Iwo Jima campaign. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the use of flamethrowers began to influence the broader strategy. Japanese officers attempted to adapt by modifying tunnel entrances, creating secondary escape routes, and dispersing troops to reduce the impact of concentrated fire. Yet these adaptations were limited. The speed and intensity of the U.S. assaults, combined with technological innovation, ensured that flamethrowers remained a decisive factor in breaking fortified positions. By the end of the first week, the psychological and tactical advantages conferred by flamethrowers were evident. Japanese forces were increasingly confined to the deeper tunnel networks, their ability to mount counterattacks diminished.
U.S. Marines had gained critical footholds, allowing further advances toward the southern slopes and Suribachi's summit. Flamethrowers had proven their worth not just as weapons, but as instruments that reshaped the battlefield, forcing defenders to confront fire in ways they had neither trained for nor anticipated. The stage was set for the continued struggle, a fight not only of firepower, but of endurance, courage, and human will. What had begun as a series of tactical engagements now had implications for the remainder of the campaign, setting the tone for the psychological and physical battles that lay ahead.
As the battle for Iwo Jima progressed, the consequences of the flamethrowers' use became increasingly clear. Japanese defenses, once meticulously designed and seemingly impenetrable, were gradually reduced to fractured tunnels and isolated pillboxes. The strategic advantage gained by U.S. forces allowed them to advance with greater speed and efficiency, capturing key terrain that would have taken weeks to secure through conventional assaults alone. Suribachi's slopes, once a fortress of concrete and volcanic rock, were now littered with scorched remains of bunkers and collapsed tunnels, silent witnesses to the devastating power of fire. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders cannot be overstated. Flamethrowers introduced an element of terror previously unseen in the Pacific campaigns. Soldiers forced to confront streams of burning fuel in confined bunkers experienced panic, disorientation, and, in some cases, surrender, a profound deviation from the traditional code of honor. The constant threat of fire undermined cohesion and morale. Command reports later noted that even disciplined units began to fracture under the relentless assault. Their ability to coordinate counterattacks diminished as fear took hold. Kuribayashi's strategy of attrition, reliant on the defenders' resilience, had been compromised in a matter of days. For the Marines, the lessons learned were equally profound. Flamethrowers proved decisive in reducing prolonged engagements, minimizing exposure to enemy fire, and achieving objectives that would have otherwise required heavy casualties. Operational analyses emphasized the necessity of integrated tactics. Flamethrower teams could not operate in isolation, but required coordination with infantry, covering fire, in demolitions. The success of these methods reinforced the importance of technology-informed tactics in modern warfare, demonstrating how innovation could shift the balance even against a well-prepared enemy. The battle also revealed broader strategic implications for the Pacific theater. The capture of Iwo Jima's airfields allowed the U.S. to establish forward bases for fighter escorts and emergency landings for B-29 bombers targeting the Japanese mainland. The effectiveness of flamethrowers in reducing fortified positions informed subsequent island assaults, including Okinawa, shaping U.S. military doctrine. Reports from commanders emphasized that the combination of psychological shock and physical destruction produced by flamethrowers could decisively influence engagements, making them a permanent fixture in the arsenal for siege operations. Post-war reflections capture the human cost of this innovation. Memoirs from Marines describe the duality of relief and unease. Flamethrowers saved lives by reducing prolonged firefights, yet the terror inflicted upon Japanese soldiers weighed heavily on operators. For the Japanese, the experiences in bunkers, fire, smoke, and the sudden collapse of supposedly secure positions remained a haunting chapter. Historians note that these encounters left lasting impressions on both sides, shaping perceptions of modern combat's brutality and the psychological dimensions of warfare. By mid-March 1945, as Iwo Jima was fully secured, the role of flamethrowers in the campaign was universally acknowledged. They had transformed the assault from a grinding siege into a series of decisive engagements where speed, firepower, and psychological impact worked in tandem. The island's capture came at a tremendous cost. Approximately 6,800 U.S. Marines were killed and over 19,000 wounded, while nearly all of the 21,000 Japanese defenders perished.
Within these numbers, the effects of flamethrower operations were evident. Entire bunker networks had been neutralized rapidly, saving Marines from prolonged exposure but delivering catastrophic consequences to those inside. Ultimately, the aftermath of Iwo Jima underscored a harsh reality of modern warfare. Technology, human will, and strategy intersect in ways that can decisively shape outcomes, often with profound ethical and psychological consequences. Flamethrowers had proven that innovation could break even the most disciplined defenses, but they also illuminated the darker dimensions of combat: fear, suffering, and the human cost of tactical advantage. The battlefield, still smoldering, bore witness not only to the destruction of fortifications, but to the transformation of warfare itself. What had begun as an island fortress had become a crucible of fire, human endurance, and strategic insight, setting the stage for the final reflections on courage, morality, and the enduring legacy of the Battle of Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima stands as one of the most harrowing chapters of the Pacific War, a place where courage, innovation, and sheer human endurance collided with the unforgiving realities of fortified combat. Flamethrowers, once marginal tools in the U.S. arsenal, emerged as instruments that could penetrate stone, steel, and the human psyche. They did not merely destroy bunkers, they exposed the vulnerability of the human spirit under relentless, inescapable fire. The men operating them carried both the weight of responsibility and the burden of witnessing the devastating consequences of their actions. For the Japanese defenders, the encounter with flame was transformative. Their carefully engineered fortifications, honed over months, had been rendered partially futile by a weapon that reached into the darkest recesses of tunnels and caves. The psychological impact, fear, disorientation, and the sudden realization that the battlefield had changed altered the very nature of their resistance. Even the most disciplined soldiers were forced to confront the limits of endurance and the harrowing cost of defense under siege. Strategically, the success of flamethrowers on Iwo Jima reshaped amphibious warfare. Commanders recognized that combined arms, fire, infantry, artillery, and planning could overcome seemingly impregnable positions with fewer casualties than attritional assaults alone. The battle demonstrated that innovation in warfare was as much about understanding psychology and human behavior as it was about brute force. Yet, beyond strategy and technology lies the human dimension. Iwo Jima was a crucible of emotion, fear, and resolve, a testament to the extremes of human experience in war. Every bunker consumed by flame, every tunnel cleared, carried a story of courage and terror, of discipline and desperation. History remembers the triumphs and the toll, the tactical brilliance and the suffering it entailed. The legacy of Iwo Jima is not merely in maps or casualty figures. It is in the lessons of human endurance, the interplay of technology and psychology, and the stark reality that in war, innovation can illuminate both the heights of strategic ingenuity and the depths of human cost. On that black volcanic island, fire became more than a weapon. It became a measure of resilience, a catalyst of change, and a reminder of the indelible human stories etched into history's darkest battles.